Welcome to Male Revenge. This channel exists for men who have been wronged and who still believe that justice is not finished with them. The Bible tells us in Romans 12, verse 19, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord." We do not seek revenge here. We seek justice. We tell the stories of men who refused to let what was theirs be taken from them. This is Roy Decker's story, and it begins like this. My son began planning to take everything I built before my wife was even sick. While she was still teaching, while I still trusted him, he had already hired lawyers before there was any reason to. If someone close to you has started managing your finances and telling you that you seem confused, I need you to hear what happened to me. Because my wife saw it coming before I did. Here is where it started. The first thing I noticed was the ceiling, white tiles, 2 cracks running parallel above the window, a water stain shaped like something I could not name. I stared at them for a long time before I understood I was in a hospital. Before I understood I was anywhere at all. The second thing I noticed was the pain. 3 ribs on my left side felt like broken glass every time I breathed. My left shoulder had been relocated. The nurse would tell me later. That is a clean medical word for something that involves a doctor bracing 1 foot against a grown man and pulling. 11 stitches along my jaw. A concussion rated mild, which I have learned means serious enough to keep you here, but not serious enough for us to seem alarmed. I am Roy Decker, 67 years old. I have been hurt before. 22 years as an Army Ranger will do that. What bothered me more than the ribs was the smell. Hospital antiseptic over cafeteria food, over the warmth of indoor heating in a Montana February. The smell of a place that keeps you alive while your mind is somewhere else. My mind had been somewhere else entirely. The last clear thing I remembered was the ridge on Beartooth Pass. Snow crust firm enough to hold weight. The gray February sky that meant weather was coming. I had been guiding Wallace, a retired surgeon from Houston, on an elk survey. We had stopped to glass a draw below the tree line when the wind from the slope behind us shifted. Wrong direction. The direction that carries your scent to something you do not want to meet. I turned at the sound. A salt block half buried in snow. 20 yards uphill from where we had been standing. I registered it the way you register the wrong detail in a room you know well. That block did not belong there. Placing a salt lick on a Beartooth Ridge trail in February takes knowledge of the terrain and the animal patterns, and roughly 2 hours of deliberate work on a cold slope. It takes someone who had been up here before, someone who knew exactly where Roy Decker walked. I saw it in the first second and understood what it meant in the second second, and then the bear was on me, and there was no time for anything but the training. I woke up here. 4 days later, Wallace had called the emergency line. The helicopter had lifted me off the pass and brought me to Billings Clinic. Long enough, as it turned out, for Marcus to drive up from Las Vegas. My son sat in the chair beside my bed, 41 years old. He had his mother's eyes, the dark brown that went almost black in low light, charcoal jacket over a blue shirt. He had walked away from something professional. He was leaning forward, phone face down in his hands. Face down was the closest Marcus ever came to putting the phone away. He looked up when I shifted. "Dad." He was on his feet before the word finished. Hand on my forearm. Careful of the IV line. "You are awake." "How do you feel?" "Water," I said. My voice came out like gravel through a rusted pipe. He poured from the pitcher and held the cup while I drank. That small act registered behind the concussion and the pain the way unexpected things register when your defenses are down. Marcus was not a man who poured water for people. Physical caretaking had always been Diane's role. In 32 years, she was the one who appeared at your elbow with what you needed before you knew you needed it. The cup of water was something new. While I drank, he glanced toward the bedside drawer, the one where the nurse had placed my wallet, my phone, and the small notepad I carry everywhere. It was a brief look, half a second. The kind of look a man gives a thing he is cataloging rather than seeing. I noticed it because I have spent a career noticing what other men look at when they think no one is watching. I filed it. My head hurt too much for anything more. How long? I said. 4 days. Ribs need 6 to 8 weeks. Shoulder will need physical therapy. The concussion they are monitoring. The guiding season, I said. Marcus paused. Half a second. A man who did not know him would have missed it. We can talk about that when you are stronger. Dad, tell me now. He looked at his hands. I reached out to some of your clients. Let them know you are recovering. Managed expectations while you were unable to communicate directly. Marcus had never involved himself in my business. For 5 years. Decker Wilderness Outfitters had been a name he acknowledged at Christmas and set aside. Now he was contacting my clients while I had been unconscious and unable to speak for myself. The concussion wrapped everything in gauze. I closed my eyes. I heard Marcus step into the hallway. His voice came back low and quick. I caught fragments. A number? Something that sounded like a count. 3 words arrived before everything else dissolved. The timing is perfect. I reached for the call button on my bedrail. The one I had not pressed once in 4 days. Because pressing it meant admitting I could not manage on my own, and I had not been that man in 67 years. My fingers found the button and held it. I did not press it. The medication won. In the morning, Marcus was already gone. The bedside drawer was open 2 inches. I was certain I had closed it the night before. 3 weeks in Billings Clinic will teach you things about a man that years of holiday visits cannot. Marcus came every day at 11 in the morning and left every day at 5 in the afternoon. Not approximately, not usually. Every single day. 11 and 5. With the precision of someone who had scheduled these visits on a calendar and intended to keep that schedule regardless of what was happening in the room. He brought coffee from the place on Grand Avenue. Same order each time. He sat in the same chair and asked reasonable questions about my pain level and what the physical therapist had said that morning. It was the consistency that bothered me. I am not a man who distrusts consistency. But there is a consistency that comes from care and a consistency that comes from management, and they feel different in a room. Diane used to say that nobody is that regular without a reason. She meant it as a compliment when she said it about teachers who showed up the same way for their students year after year. I was not sure she would have meant it as a compliment here. I did not examine that thought. I filed it with the others and let the physical therapy occupy my mornings. The call from Gary Hutchins came on a Tuesday. Gary was a retired civil engineer from Billings who had booked the October elk hunt every year for 9 years. Not a man who picked up the phone without reason. Clients did not call me in February. Roy, he said. Good to hear your voice. How are you feeling? Better than I was. Getting there. A pause too long. Gary Hutchins did not pause. I heard about the accident. Glad you are recovering. Thank you, Gary. What can I do for you? Roy, I got a call a few weeks back. Someone who said he was calling on your behalf. Your son. I kept my eyes on the window. Snow on the Beartooth peaks. The same peaks the helicopter had pulled me off of. What did he say? He said you were having some difficulties. Beyond the accident. Gary stopped. Roy, I want to hear it from you directly. I appreciate that. What exactly did he tell you? A longer pause this time. A man choosing words carefully. He said you had been forgetting appointments. He said last fall you called a client by the wrong name 3 times in one guided hunt and did not realize it. He said you left a propane burner running at base camp overnight. He said he had been watching it get worse for 8 months and that the accident on the pass was not the first close call this season. Gary cleared his throat. Roy, I have known you 9 years. I know that is not you. But the way he said it, he sounded like a son who had been carrying this alone for a long time. That is what made me believe him. I told Gary I would call him back. Not one of those things had happened. Not one. But they were not random inventions. They were specific enough to sound real and general enough to be impossible to disprove. The kind of details a careful person chooses. When Marcus arrived at 11, I waited until he had settled and lifted his coffee. Gary Hutchins called me this morning. I said. Marcus looked up. Nothing shifted in his face. That stillness was the thing Diane always said was his father in him. He did not show what he was processing. How is Gary? He canceled his October booking. He told me you called him and said I had been forgetting things. Calling clients by the wrong name. Leaving propane burners running at camp overnight. Marcus set his coffee down. He looked at me with something that appeared to be regret. The careful regret of a man who has anticipated a conversation and prepared his position. Dad, I should have told you first. I was trying to protect you. Protect me by telling people I was losing my mind. By explaining that your recovery was complicated, that the season was uncertain. If they heard about the accident without context, they would assume the worst anyway. At least this way they heard it from family. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the earnest position I now recognized as deliberate. I may have given some examples to illustrate how difficult things had been for you. I was trying to make them understand. Examples you invented. See, examples that captured the situation. He did not flinch at the word invented. I was trying to help. He met my eyes when he said it. Held them exactly the right amount of time. Not too long. Not too short. The way you hold eye contact when you have practiced holding it. I had interrogated enough men in enough difficult rooms to know the difference between someone looking at you and someone performing looking at you. I noted it. Said nothing. Let him think it had landed. After Marcus left, I called Gary back. Marcus had given him a complete narrative. Detailed and sympathetic and entirely false. Delivered while I was unconscious, 400 miles away. Then I checked my email. There was a message from an address I did not recognize. Sent 4 days ago. With the subject line, Decker Wilderness Outfitters. Transfer of Operations Inquiry. The body of the email referenced a recent conversation with my son regarding the potential sale of my guiding license and territorial hunting rights in the Stillwater County corridor. It said the interested party looked forward to continuing discussions at my earliest convenience. It listed a price. I read that number twice. Then I read it a third time. I set the phone on the kitchen table and sat in the chair across from Diane's photograph and looked at her face in the way I had been looking at it every morning for 7 months, searching it for something she could no longer give me. And for the first time since she died, I understood that she had already given it to me. I just did not know where to look yet. The cabin smelled the same. Machine oil and wood smoke and something I could never name but always recognized. The scent of a house kept by the same two people for 30 years. I stood in the doorway for a moment before I stepped inside. The same coat hooks by the door. The same silence that had been waiting since October. Marcus carried my bag in and set it by the bedroom door. Asked if I needed anything. I said no. He stood there another moment, hands in his coat pockets, looking around the main room the way he had looked at my bedside drawer in the hospital. Not nostalgia, assessment. Then he said he would call tomorrow and drove back. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the truck fade until there was nothing left but the wind in the pines and the particular silence of a house with one person in it instead of two. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, put Diane's photograph in front of me the way I had done every morning since she died, because the alternative was letting a whole morning pass without looking at her face. And I was not ready for that. 32 years of mornings at this table. Her coffee cup across from mine. Her reading glasses on the newspaper. I had not planned well enough for this particular quiet. I sat until the light went gray and then dark. The 3 words came back around 9. The timing is perfect. I had been carrying them for 6 weeks without putting them anywhere permanent. They sat with Marcus's bedside drawer glance, and Gary's canceled booking, and the email price I had read 3 times, and the practiced eye contact, and the explanation I had accepted because I was not ready for what rejecting it would require. But I was home now. I set my coffee down. I walked to Diane's desk, dark walnut, bought at an estate sale in Absaroki the year we moved into the cabin. 3 drawers on the right side, 1 wide drawer on the left. The right drawers I had opened 100 times. The left drawer I had never opened. It was not a rule we had made. It was an understanding that arrived without discussion. The way certain understandings arrive between 2 people who have lived close enough for long enough. That drawer was Diane's. A small brass lock. I had never seen her use the key in front of me. I knew where the key was. 32 years of marriage means knowing where everything is. Not because you look for it, because you pay attention every day without meaning to. And eventually, you carry a map of another person that you never remember drawing. The key was in the ceramic dish on her nightstand, under the pearl earrings she had worn to our wedding and every anniversary after. I carried it to the desk. The lock opened on the first try. Inside was a Nokia phone I did not recognize. The folding kind, 15 years old at least. Underneath it, a small solar charging panel with a thin cable running to the phone's port. And underneath both, a sheet of paper folded once. My name on the outside in Diane's handwriting. The same handwriting from lesson plans and grocery lists and the birthday cards she left on my pillow every year for 32 years. I sat down in her chair. I opened the note first. Roy, if you are reading this, then I am gone and something has happened that I was afraid might happen. This phone has what you need. He has already started. Roy. The first video will show you the accounts. What you find there will be hard to look at. Look at it anyway. The password is the day we met. Month, then day, then year. I am sorry I could not tell you while I was here. You would not have believed me, and I did not want our last time together to be about this. I love you more than I have ever known how to say. That has always been true. Watch the videos in order. Then decide what to do. I trust you. I always have. Diane. I sat with that note a long time. Then I thought about her sitting in this chair, recording this in the middle of the night. Most likely. While I slept 20 feet away. while cancer was working through her body and she was spending what was left of her strength on this, on protecting me from something I did not know was coming. She had not told me because she knew I would go to Marcus directly, and that would have given him time to disappear the evidence. She was dying, and she was still 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. Outside the window, the wind moved through the pines, the way it always moved on this ridge at night. The sound, Diane used to say, was the mountain breathing. I had lived with that sound for 25 years and never thought to name it until she named it. I picked up the phone. The date we met, a Saturday in September, 1998. I typed it in. The screen lit up. 4 videos, 3 labeled with dates, the 4th labeled with 2 words. For Marcus. I opened the first dated video and pressed play. Her voice came out of that small speaker, and my whole body reacted before my mind did. 32 years of marriage and certain sounds bypass thought entirely. The particular way she said my name, Roy, 2 letters. She had said it 10,000 times, in the dark, across this kitchen table, at the end of long silences, and it had never once sounded the same way twice. I stopped the video, not because I could not bear to hear it, because I needed a moment to be a man who could. I set the phone face down on the walnut surface, placed both hands flat, looked out the window into the Montana darkness, and breathed through it the way I had breathed through harder things. Then I turned the phone back over. The first video was 11 minutes and 40 seconds long. I watched it the way I had learned to receive intelligence in the field, not reacting, letting it come in full before deciding what to do with it. Diane had set the phone on a book stack at her desk, camera level with her face, the lamp casting her in the warm light I recognized from 32 years of evenings in this house. She looked directly at the camera. Her voice was steady. She told me Marcus had been asking to borrow from our retirement accounts for 2 years and had been refused every time. She told me his total debt, $87,000, that he had contacted a guardianship attorney 4 months before she was diagnosed. The billing statement had arrived in misrouted mail, and she had photographed it. She gave me the name of the private psychologist Marcus had hired, Dr. Glenn Ferris. With a disciplinary record in Idaho, she had found through 2 hours of public records searching, all of it found while she was sick, while I had believed I was the one protecting her. When the first video ended, I set the phone on the desk and walked to the kitchen sink and turned on the tap and drank from it the way you drink when your mouth has gone dry for reasons that have nothing to do with thirst. I stood there for a moment, with both hands on the edge of the counter, and looked at the dark window and thought about one specific thing Diane had said. The guardianship attorney, contacted 4 months before she was diagnosed, before she was sick, before there was any legitimate reason to think about what would happen to Roy Decker's assets. Marcus had started this before his mother's illness gave him a story to hide it behind. He had been building toward this independently of her death. She had just become useful to the timeline. I walked back to the desk and pressed play on the second video. 4 minutes. No Diane. Just darkness and a door frame. The phone aimed at our dining table where Marcus sat with his back to the camera, phone to his ear. The tone was professional, clipped. A man who had thought through what he intended to say before he dialed. He said the timeline was moving forward. He said the documents needed to be ready to move quickly. He said when the old man is out of commission, we file on everything the same week. Guiding license first because that is the identity, then the property, then whatever is left in the accounts. I stopped the video. I stood up from the desk and walked to the window. The wind was in the pines, indifferent to everything happening below it. The old man, Not Dad. Not his father. The old man. It is the phrase a person uses for something they have already separated themselves from, already placed outside the circle of what deserves consideration. I had heard it in that flat professional tone that Marcus used for deals and meetings and things that needed to get done. I had taught him to hunt on this land. I had sat beside him in the truck on 300 miles of Wyoming highway, teaching him to drive, my foot hovering over a brake pedal on my side of the car. I had gone to every baseball game in every cold April for 7 years. The old man. I stood there until I was ready. There were 2 videos left. I looked at the screen for a moment before I pressed anything. The third one had a date. The fourth one had 2 words. I understood that watching the third one meant committing to whatever came after it. And I needed to make that choice consciously rather than by default. I pressed play on the third video. Diane looked different in this one. Thinner. The hair had started going. Her hands in her lap held the particular stillness of someone who does not have energy to spend on unnecessary movement. But her eyes were the same eyes that had looked at me across 1,000 morning tables and known what I was thinking before I said it. She said she did not know what form it would take when it came. She said she had done what she could. Then she looked at the camera the way she had always looked at me when she needed me to actually hear something. And she said what she had to say. You have been protecting things your whole life. Roy. The men beside you. This land. Me. You did not stop when it was hard, and you did not stop when you were scared, and you will not stop now. I know that. Whatever he has done or is planning to do, it is not bigger than you. It only feels that way right now because you did not know about it yet. Now you do. Stand up. The video ended. I sat without moving for longer than I should have. Not because I was broken, because some things deserve to be sat with before you stand up from them. Then I looked at the fourth video, the one that said, "For Marcus only." I put my thumb over it and held it there. This one was not mine. Whatever Diane had said to our son in those final weeks, she had said it to him, not to me, and I was not going to breach that. Not tonight. Not ever. It was the last thing she had given him, and it belonged to him regardless of what he had done. And I understood that holding to that line was not weakness. It was the last way I had of being the man she had believed I was. I set the phone face down. The clock above the stove read 3:17. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Dale Whitehorse. 2 rings. A voice that moved from sleep to alert in the space of a single syllable. The way soldiers learn to do and never unlearn. Dale, I said. 1 breath. Then I am on my way. Give me an hour. Dale Whitehorse arrived at 5 in the morning, with 2 coffees from the Senex station in Absaroki, which meant he had not gone back to sleep after I called. He had driven 32 miles in the dark and stopped at a gas station not yet open and gotten the attendant to let him in. Because Dale had been sheriff of this county for 11 years and knew everyone who worked before dawn. He set 1 coffee in front of me and sat down across the table. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask if I was all right. 28 years of knowing someone means understanding when a man needs to tell you something and when he needs you to simply be there. Dale had always understood that distinction. I laid it out in order. The hospital and the bedside drawer. Marcus's visits, the precision of them. Gary Hutchins and the specific lies. The details chosen to be real enough to believe and vague enough to be impossible to disprove. The email with the price I had read 3 times. Diane's desk and the key and the phone and its 4 videos. I set the phone on the table between us. Watch the first and second, I said. Not the fourth. Dale watched without expression. He was Crow Nation, an ex-Marine, and had spent 3 decades in rooms where people were telling him difficult things, which gives a man a particular stillness. He watched video 1 all the way through, then video 2. When Marcus's voice said the old man, Dale put his coffee down. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you known?" "Since last night," I said. He turned his cup in his hands. Then he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear it as a question and not as doubt. Ask it. Is there anything in what Diane said that could be read a different way? Anything that could be explained as misunderstanding rather than intent?" I thought about it. The attorney contacted before she was diagnosed. The recording. The email with the price listed for my guiding rights and land. "No," I said. Dale nodded once. "That is what I thought. But I needed you to think it through rather than feel it." He looked at the phone on the table for a moment before he said what he had come to say. "Roy," he said, "I have seen this before. Not exactly this. The mechanism is what I recognize. Someone uses the law the way a lockpick uses a lock, finds the tool that fits the door. In this county, I have seen it 3 times in 4 years. Family member with money problems, elder living alone or recently bereaved. Legal paperwork filed before the person understands what is happening." He paused. "The law is supposed to protect people like you. Sometimes it is the thing they use against you instead." He said this without bitterness, which told me he had made peace with that knowledge long before tonight. If the amounts are what Diane said, this crosses into federal territory. I told him the numbers, the debt, what Diane had described about the accounts, the guiding license and property in the email. Dale pulled out his phone, typed for 30 seconds, scrolled, read. I watched the sky outside shift from black to the dark blue that precedes a Montana dawn. The color that means the cold is about to find the last gaps in everything before the sun makes it stop. He set his phone down. "It has been filed, Roy," he said. "Guardianship petition. 3 weeks ago, Stillwater County. 3 weeks ago, I had been unconscious in Billings Clinic. I sat with the specific shape of that. Marcus had filed the paperwork to take legal control of my life, then driven up to sit beside my hospital bed, pour my water, ask if I needed the nurse. He had filed it before he made that drive. The paperwork existed before the visit. I let myself feel what that meant in full before I moved on from it. Then I moved on from it. Because sitting with it longer than necessary was something I could not afford. "Who is the presiding judge?" I said. "Carol Whitman." Dale said her name with care. "She is thorough. She will not move on anything she has not examined herself." "But Roy, a filed petition has momentum, and Stillwater County has a mandatory 30-day review period from the date of filing." "How long?" Dale looked at his phone. 31 days from today." I looked at the clock above the stove. 5:54 in the morning. 31 days. I had run operations on shorter timelines. The difference was that in those operations I had known both the terrain and the objective from the first briefing. Here I was learning them simultaneously. The difference was also that in those operations I had not been 67 years old with 3 recently healed ribs and a son who had filed papers to declare me incompetent. I noted that difference. Set it aside. "We need Maggie Tran," Dale said. "You used her on the Red Horse Estate case." I said, 2 years ago. Forensic accounting, financial fraud, expert testimony. If Marcus has been moving money the way Diane described, Maggie will document it in a form that holds in a federal courtroom. She does not charge veterans for initial consultations. I am not looking for charity. Dale looked at me with the expression he used for things I said that were not worth arguing with directly. Roy, he said, Maggie Tran does not do charity. She does justice. She would correct you on that herself. I looked at Diane's photograph where I had placed it on the table the night before. Her face in lamplight. The faint expression she wore when something was quietly funny, and she had decided not to say so out loud. 31 days, I said. Dale turned his cup in his hands one more time. Where do you want to start? He said. Maggie Tran's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on 2nd Avenue North in Billings, between a bail bondsman and an agricultural law firm. The elevator was out. The office itself was something else. Floor-to-ceiling binders organized by year and case number. 2 monitors on a clear desk except for a legal pad, a mechanical pencil, and her own single-cup coffee maker, which she had apparently brought because she had decided the office supply was inadequate and done something about it. She looked up when Dale opened the door. You must be Roy Decker, she said. Sit down. Tell me what you have access to. Not hello, not good morning. I liked her immediately. I had brought every account statement I could access. The documents Diane had photographed before she died. The email about the transfer of operations. And a list of every institution where we had ever held an account. Maggie reviewed the list, asked 3 questions, typed something into her computer, and said, "Give me 48 hours." Then she looked at Dale. You said he needed preliminary findings today. Whatever you can give him, Dale said. She worked without wasted motion. No conversation that was not directly relevant. She moved through the records methodically, flagging line items with a system she did not explain. Dale and I sat across from her and did not interrupt. Outside the window on 2nd Avenue, Billings was waking up. A delivery truck, a woman walking a dog. The ordinary morning of people who did not know that 30 days from now a judge would decide whether Roy Decker had the right to run his own life. After 40 minutes, she stopped. Mr. Decker, she said, I need you to look at something. She turned one monitor so I could see it. A spreadsheet she had built, dates in the first column, amounts in the second. The dates ran from late 2002 through mid-2006. That is your household account, she said. Do you recognize the period? I looked at the dates. Marcus had started at the University of Montana in fall 2002. He graduated in May 2006. Those are the 4 years Marcus was in college. I said. Maggie nodded. Look at the amounts. $230, $310, $180, $275, 50 entries over 4 years. Each amount different. No 2 months identical. Nothing large enough to trigger the bank's automatic alert threshold. The total at the bottom read $18,240. I looked at that number for longer than I looked at most things. $18,000. Taken in amounts small enough that neither Diane nor I had ever been certain enough to say something was wrong. Only uncertain enough to wonder. I remembered a Tuesday in October of 2003. Diane at the kitchen table with the green household ledger she kept. Her reading glasses on, adding a column that would not come out right. I do not understand this month. Roy. We must have miscounted somewhere. I had told her not to worry about it. I would pick up extra workshop hours in November. These things happen. These things had been happening because our son was taking money from our account, and we had not known it was a choice someone was making. We had thought it was arithmetic. We had never once thought it was a decision. He was 18 when it started. I said, "Yes," Maggie said. I was paying his tuition at the same time. I looked at the dates on the screen. I was teaching him how to manage a checking account that summer, how to track his spending, how to keep a monthly ledger. Maggie let the silence hold for a moment before she answered. "And then he used that knowledge," she said. "On your account instead of his own. There was nothing useful to say to that, so I did not say anything." I looked out the window at 2nd Avenue for a moment. The delivery truck was gone. An ordinary Tuesday morning continuing without reference to anything happening in this room. Then I looked back at the screen. "Is there more?" I said. Maggie turned the monitor back toward herself and typed for a minute. When she stopped, the stillness in her shoulders was different from the stillness she had held through the previous 40 minutes. Tighter. The stillness of someone who has found something unexpected. "Mr. Decker," she said. The college-era pattern is the work of someone learning as they go. Competent, but improvised. The recent transfers are different. She turned the second monitor so I could see it. The amounts and timing over the last 18 months follow calibrated intervals that avoid 3 separate banking compliance thresholds simultaneously. That level of coordination requires someone with genuine expertise in institutional fraud detection. She looked at me directly. "Marcus does not have that expertise." Dale leaned forward. "You are saying someone helped him build the recent system. Someone designed it," Maggie said. "The sophistication gap between the two periods is too large to explain any other way." She clicked her pencil twice. "Whoever did this understood exactly what they were building, and they built it specifically to be difficult to trace." She paused. "The reason I say difficult rather than impossible," she said, "is that I have been doing this for 22 years, and nobody builds a system without leaving something." She clicked the pencil again. "Give me until tomorrow morning. I will find it." I looked at Dale. He looked at Maggie with the expression he used for people who had just told him something he already suspected was true. 30 days, I said. 29 by the time you have something. Maggie pulled her legal pad close. "That is enough time," she said. "Though I prefer to have more of it." Maggie did not look up from her monitors. "I have found things in less time than that," she said. "Give me until morning." I made the calls from the kitchen table with the names written out in order on the legal pad. An old army habit. Difficult work goes down on paper first. Then you do it in sequence, and you do not skip any of it. 6 names, 6 people Marcus had contacted while I was unconscious in Billings Clinic. I started with Gary Hutchins because I already knew what I was walking into. He told me Marcus had called twice. The second call came 3 days after the first, to follow up on whether Gary had made a decision. Following up. As though a 10-year booking was a sales lead that needed to be managed. The second and third calls followed the same pattern. Someone claiming to be my son had explained that my health was not what it appeared, that I had been struggling, that October was uncertain. I listened to each person and thanked them and moved to the next name. 3 had already canceled. I crossed each name as I finished. The crossing off was deliberate. I needed to see the work being done rather than the work remaining. The fourth call was different. Dan Kowalski had booked the October hunt 2 years running. He was 58 years old and had driven up from Wyoming both times. A 12-hour round trip he made because he said there was nobody in the Mountain West who read elk terrain the way I did. When he answered my call, his voice was not apologetic. It was cold. "Roy," he said, "I want you to know I canceled before the call came. I had already heard from another outfitter that you had been turning clients around mid-expedition, sending people home without explanation. I had not turned anyone around mid-expedition. I had not sent anyone home without explanation. I said so. I know that now, Dan said. I checked. The outfitter who told me was one who picked up 2 of your canceled clients last fall. He had a reason to say what he said. I should have checked before I canceled. He paused. I am sorry, Roy. I should have come to you directly. I thanked him and ended the call. The information about turned-around expeditions had not come from Marcus. It had come from a competitor who had benefited from the cancellations. Marcus had not just lied to my clients. He had started something that propagated on its own. A stone dropped in water does not control every ripple. Bill Harmon called me back before I could reach him. He was from outside Houston, a client for 7 years. His voice when I answered had the directness of someone who had been thinking about what to say. Roy, he said, whoever called me knew exactly how to make me doubt you. I told him I was listening. It was the specificity, he said. Not just health difficulties. He said you had been canceling guide trips mid-expedition and not remembering you had done it. He said one client last August found you sitting alone on a ridge, unable to recall how you had gotten there. He said he had been watching it develop for almost a year. Bill paused. Roy. I believed him for about a day because it was too specific to be invented. Then I called the client he mentioned, who told me nothing of the sort had happened. I called 2 more of your regulars. Same answer. You checked, I said. I checked. He said, I have not canceled my October booking. But Roy, whoever did this studied you. They knew the right details to use. They knew exactly which kind of story a man like me would find hardest to dismiss. I wrote studied, knew exactly which story a man like me would find hardest to dismiss. Pete Langley called while I was still thinking about that. Pete was from Savannah, Georgia, 63 years old, 11 years without missing an October hunt. He sent handwritten thank you cards after every trip, a habit I had always found slightly formal, but had grown to appreciate. Roy, he said, I heard you were in the hospital. I am glad you are on your feet. I told him about the calls Marcus had made. I know, Pete said. A man called me. Said he was your son. Said you had been struggling. I told him I had hunted elk with Roy Decker for 11 years, and that I knew what a man who was losing his mind looked like, and that Roy Decker was not it. I told him I would see you in October and ended the call. He said this simply, without drama, the way he talked about weather and elk patterns. Then he asked how my ribs were healing, and we talked for 3 minutes about nothing important, and said goodbye. I sat at the kitchen table for a while after. Then I walked to the main room and stood in front of the elk rack. 12-point bull, Beartooth, 1999. Diane had mounted it 2 inches higher than I marked, which she said looked better, and she had been right. I put my hand on it and thought about Dan Kowalski checking the story and finding it wrong but canceling anyway, because he had not checked soon enough. I thought about the outfitter who had told his own version of events, and the 2 clients who had gone to him instead. I thought about 3 names crossed off a legal pad that represented 30 years of a single man's word being reliable in difficult terrain. I took my hand off the rack. 3 names, 30 years. The phone in my pocket rang. Unknown number. Las Vegas area code. I answered, Mr. Decker. The voice was young, female, controlled with visible effort. My name is Kayla Marsh. I need to speak with you about Marcus. I am the one who helped him design the financial system. I thought it was going to be temporary. She stopped. I said nothing and waited, and I think, she said more quietly, that I am in a great deal of trouble. I walked to the kitchen table and sat down and picked up the legal pad. Talk, I said. A pause. Then she started. Her name was Kayla Marsh, 29 years old, accountant at a boutique financial firm in Las Vegas. She and Marcus had been together 2 years. She said this the way you say things that used to mean something and are in the process of meaning something else. She told me how it started. Marcus had come to her 14 months ago with what he called a short-term cash flow problem. He owed money to people he could not be slow about repaying, and he asked if she could help him move small amounts from an outside account, in amounts calibrated to avoid triggering automated bank alerts. He said the account belonged to his father. He said his father was in declining health, and that the family had agreed Marcus would manage the finances until things stabilized. I designed the withdrawal architecture, she said. The intervals, the amounts, the routing, built to federal threshold compliance so no single transaction would flag for review. I am very good at what I do, Mr. Decker. I want you to understand that so you understand what you are dealing with. I wrote built to avoid flagging. Very good at what she does. She continued. For the first 6 months, she believed it was temporary. She watched the account balance with the intention of returning the money once his debt resolved. Then Marcus began talking about the larger picture, the reverse mortgage on the cabin and land, the guiding license, property transfers. He told her these were protective measures, that medical costs for a declining elder could eliminate an estate quickly, and that he was working to preserve what remained. I looked at the legal pad. I had been waiting for the right moment to ask the question that would tell me what kind of cooperation this was. When did you first understand this was not going to be paid back? I said. She was quiet for a moment. Not the pause of someone gathering words, but the pause of someone deciding how honest to be. When he started talking about the guiding license, she said, You do not take over a man's business license and operating territory to protect him from care costs. Those are permanent transfers. I understood then that this was not structured to be reversed. I asked him directly, and he said I was overthinking it. I let that answer stand for longer than I should have. When did you stop letting it stand? I said. After the accident on the pass. Marcus called her that night, and his voice had a quality she had not heard before. Not grief, not fear. Something closer to relief. He talked about timing. He said things were moving faster than expected, but that this was workable. She had stayed on the phone 40 minutes, and afterwards sat in her apartment thinking about the word workable for a long time. She had started asking questions he did not want to answer. He told her she was already participating and that it was too late to have that conversation. Then he stopped returning her calls entirely. I have one question, I said. The answer will tell me whether this conversation is useful or whether I end it now and call an attorney instead. She said nothing, which was the right response. When Marcus called my hunting clients, I said, Were you there? 4 seconds. I was in the apartment. She said, That is not what I asked. 2 more seconds. I was in the room. She said. I was sitting at the kitchen table while he made the calls. I heard what he said to each of them. I did not stop him. I set the phone on the table. Looked out the window at the dark shapes of the Beartooth peaks in the last of the evening light. The same peaks Roy Decker had guided 600 clients through over 30 years. The same peaks where someone had placed a salt block on a game trail in February. I picked the phone back up. "What do you want, Ms. Marsh?" I said. "I want to not go to federal prison," she said. "And I want to give you everything I have. Documentation of every structure I built. The dates Marcus requested each component. Copies of every communication. All of it. I kept records of everything. It is what accountants do." She stopped. "Then I also want you to know that I understand what I did. I am not calling to be absolved. I am calling because I am the only person in this situation who actually understands the financial architecture, and you are going to need that." It was true, and she had called because of it, rather than in spite of it, which was a kind of honesty. "Send me everything tonight," I said. "I will." My other line was ringing. Dale's name. I told Kayla I would be in contact and switched lines. "Roy." Dale's voice had the particular flatness he used when he had found something he had not expected. "I drove up to Beartooth Pass this afternoon, to the site of the accident. The salt block you saw. Roy. I found its placement location. That block was set on a game trail that requires local knowledge to find. Someone who knew that terrain planned its position deliberately." He paused. "I also found tire tracks on the forest road below the ridge. Recent. That road is not a through route. No reason to drive it unless you are heading to that specific place on that specific trail." I looked at the elk rack across the room. The one Diane had mounted 2 inches higher than where I had marked. "Dale," I said. "I know," he said. There was nothing else that needed saying between us at that moment. We had known each other 28 years. Some things did not require the words. I stayed at the cabin. That was the decision Dale and I had made the night before. Roy Decker, walking into the federal prosecutor's office in Billings, would accomplish one thing, telling Marcus that Roy Decker was no longer lying quietly in a hospital bed. Everything we had built in the last 2 days depended on Marcus believing exactly that. So Dale drove to Billings with Kayla Marsh's number saved in his phone, and I stayed at the kitchen table and waited. He called at 9:47. Kayla was cooperative. Sandra Cho, the assistant U.S. attorney for financial fraud in the district, had agreed to see them that morning after Dale's call the night before. She had cleared her afternoon when she heard what Kayla was bringing. He called again at 11:20. Kayla had given everything. Excel files with the threshold calibration structures she had built. Worksheets with Marcus's notes specifying which accounts to target in which sequence. Email chains with subject lines that would make a jury cold. Routing documentation. Copies of the reverse mortgage contract alongside the authentic one for comparison. Records of every instruction Marcus had given her from the beginning. Dated and archived. Cho had read through everything for 90 minutes, speaking only to ask clarification on specific documents. Dale said her expression had been the controlled attention of someone deciding how large a case was going to be. He called at 1:15. Cho had made her assessment. "Tell Mr. Decker we have enough, but I want 30 days to build this correctly. If we move too fast, we create grounds for appeal. If we do this right, it closes." I sat with the legal pad and worked through the numbers. Civil guardianship hearing in Stillwater County 22 days out. Federal criminal prosecution 30 days needed. They did not align. 2 fronts simultaneously. The civil case first to prevent Marcus from obtaining legal authority before we had the evidence secured. The federal case moving in parallel to build the permanent structure. The civil hearing was the lid on a pressure vessel. If Marcus won it, even temporarily, he would have access to accounts and documents we had not yet locked down. I drew 2 columns on the legal pad, civil, federal. Drew a line between them and wrote, "Cannot sacrifice one for the other." I had run operations on worse logistics. In Kandahar in 2001, my unit had been executing a primary objective while simultaneously managing a secondary threat that had materialized without warning. You divided your attention precisely. You did not let urgency on one front create carelessness on the other. It was possible. It was not comfortable. Though in those operations the enemy had not been wearing my son's face, I noted that, set it aside, there was no profit in it. By the time Dale left at 6, I had a 4-day increment sequence mapped across the 22 days remaining. I sat back and looked at it. My left hand rested on the table and the bones in that side ached faintly where the ribs had healed. They would still ache in 22 days. There was nothing to do about that. The phone rang at 7:14. I looked at the screen. Marcus. First call since I had come home from the hospital. I set the legal pad face down, breathed once. Answered, "Dad." His voice was warm, easy. The voice of a man with no reason to manage his tone. "Just checking in." "How are you feeling?" "The ribs healing up. Getting there," I said. "Better every day." "Good. Really good to hear." He paused. "I have been thinking about the guardianship hearing. I want to make sure you have someone there with you. Someone to help you understand the process." "I'll be fine," I said. "You sure?" "Because I can arrange for someone. A patient advocate. Someone who can sit with you and explain what is happening in plain language. These things can be disorienting. I understand the process." I said, "But thank you. It means a lot that you called." There was a moment where Marcus said nothing. Half a second. I had come close to something with the ribs comment. My voice had been too flat, not the careful warmth I had been holding. I adjusted, and Marcus moved on, apparently satisfied. But I sat with that half-second afterward and noted it. 22 days of phone calls and conversations I could not afford to slip in. "Of course," he said. "You're my father. Whatever I can do." "I know that," I said. We exchanged a few more words and said goodbye. The line went quiet. I sat for a long while with the phone in my hand. He had offered me a patient advocate, someone to sit with me and explain what was happening in plain language. He had said this to my voice, over the phone, without seeing my face, without knowing that I had spent the last 2 days with a forensic accountant and a federal prosecutor and a psychologist who had agreed to testify against him. He had said it because he believed it was necessary, because he had built a case over 14 months that made it seem reasonable, because he had built a version of Roy Decker that needed that kind of help. The version Diane had refused to let be the only version. Someone to explain the legal process in plain language. He had said this to my face because he had spent 14 months building the architecture to make that offer seem reasonable. Because he had spent 14 months making Roy Decker look like a man who needed someone to hold his hand in a courtroom. I thought about what Diane had done instead. 2 tin boxes, 1 phone, 1 locked drawer, 2 hours of public records searching on a Tuesday afternoon. She had not arranged for someone to explain the process to me. She had given me the tools to win it myself. I turned the legal pad back over, added 1 line at the bottom, 22 days. Do not waste a single one. 3 days before the hearing, a gray sedan pulled up the gravel road and parked in front of the cabin. I watched from the window. The driver sat in the car for a moment before getting out. People who are uncertain sit in their cars. People who have made a decision and are following it through get out directly. This man got out directly, late 50s, heavy-set from years of desk work, with movements trained to appear unhurried. He looked at the cabin before he started toward the door. I went to meet him. My right hand settled behind my back out of habit, which is something from the army I have never fully unlearned. He knocked. I opened the door. His expression when he looked at me was something I recognized without immediately naming. Then I placed it. A man who has been telling himself he would do something and has just arrived at the moment of doing it. "I believe you know who I am," he said. "You are Dr. Glenn Ferris," I said. He nodded once. "May I come in?" I moved my right hand back to my side and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him, and he wrapped his hands around it and looked at it before he looked at me. "I followed you for 8 months," he said. "From February through the end of September, on your son's commission. My assignment was to document signs of cognitive decline sufficient to support a guardianship petition." "I know," I said. He looked up briefly, then continued. "I found nothing. In 8 months of observation, I documented 0 evidence of cognitive decline. Your memory is intact. Your reasoning is sound. Your decision-making is consistent with a man 20 years younger." He said this with the flatness of someone reading from a report he had memorized. He told Marcus this after each review period. Marcus asked him to look again, then to look differently. Then, by August, to simply provide what was needed rather than what was found. "And you refused," I said. He looked at his coffee. "I refused. That is not the first time I have been asked to provide something other than what I found. I want you to understand that. I have not always refused." The Idaho matter. Diane had flagged it in her video, and Dale had confirmed it through research. A divorce case. Fabricated psychological documentation. A husband who paid well. A professional who had told himself the work was accurate enough. The reasoning that gets a person all the way through doing something wrong without fully acknowledging it. "Marcus found out about Idaho," I said. "Yes." He was thorough in his research. He used it as leverage when I declined to adjust my reports. State board review. License suspension. Give him something usable or explain Idaho to the board. "What happened then?" I said. "I terminated the contract and returned his final payment. He told me my cooperation was still required, paid or not. Then he stopped contacting me for several weeks." He paused. He looked at his coffee and something in his expression shifted. Then he looked at me directly. "2 days after your accident on the pass," he said. "Marcus called me. He told me you had suffered a severe stroke and were in a deep coma. He asked me to complete a written assessment documenting that you had shown marked cognitive decline in the weeks before the medical event. Documentation that would read as pre-existing, but include clinical language consistent with a major neurological event. He wanted it to appear that a trained professional had been tracking your decline and had predicted this outcome." I stood up from the table. I walked to the kitchen sink and turned on the tap and stood there for a moment with both hands on the counter. I had known most of what Ferris had told me, but I had not known this specific thing that Marcus had looked at the window of my unconsciousness and understood it as an opportunity. That while I was lying in Billings' clinic, sedated and unable to speak or move or dispute anything, my son had called a psychologist and asked him to write history that did not exist, to fabricate the record of a man declining before the accident that had put him in that bed, to build a paper trail that would make everything that came before it read as inevitable. I turned off the tap and walked back to the table and sat down. "Continue," I said. Ferris's expression had the quality of someone watching a man absorb something difficult and deciding to wait. A man cannot dispute what is written about him while he is in a coma. He said, I understood what that documentation would be used for, and I understood what it would mean for you. I did not write it. I stopped answering Marcus's calls. And then I came here because I have been sitting with what I know for 3 weeks, and I could not continue sitting with it. I looked at him for a long time, reading him the way I had learned to read terrain. He was not performing remorse. He was doing what he had come here to do and waiting to see what came next. I want to ask you 2 questions, I said. He nodded. Do you have detailed records of your interactions with Marcus? He reached inside his jacket and produced a folded document. Printed, multi-page, creased from being unfolded and read many times. He set it on the table between us. I keep records of every professional engagement, he said, including this one. Particularly this one. Good. I said. Second question. If I testify, Ferris said, my Idaho history becomes part of the public record of this case. I want to be clear that I understand that. Yes. I said. It will. He looked at his coffee for a moment, then back at me. One breath. Yes, he said. That is why I came. Patricia Reeves had practiced elder law in Billings for 22 years, and her office showed it. Walls of case files, each labeled with a name and a verses and another name. The verses was always the same, a family member. A single clear space on her desk for the legal pad she had already opened. She nodded once toward the chairs across from her and said, I have been briefed. Start from the beginning and do not leave anything out. I talked for 45 minutes. She listened without expression, taking notes on her legal pad with a precision that told me she was organizing what I said as I said it, not just recording it. When I finished, she reviewed what she had written, asked 4 clarifying questions, and then set her pen down. Whoever helped your wife prepare this evidence, she said, saved your life. I know, I said. She looked at the items I had brought, the printed transcripts of Diane's 3 videos, Maggie's full financial analysis and timeline, Kayla's documentation package, Ferris's records of his interactions with Marcus and his signed statement of cooperation, the email about the transfer of operations. She reviewed each item. This is an unusually complete file for a civil guardianship response, she said. Most respondents do not have 3 weeks of forewarning, a forensic accountant, and 2 cooperating witnesses. Marcus filed this petition expecting you to show up alone and confused. He does not know what is waiting for him. That is the only advantage worth holding. I said. She nodded once. Then she walked me through what would happen in the hearing room, Judge Carol Whitman's courtroom, Stillwater County. Friday morning. The petition had been filed under Montana Code Section 725311, Voluntary Adult Guardianship, which required Marcus to demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that Roy Decker was unable to make or communicate responsible decisions about his own health, safety, or financial affairs. He would present first. His evidence, Ferris's original observations, reframed as supporting documentation, since Ferris's cooperation would not yet be known to him, and whatever else he had assembled in the past month. Then I would present. Patricia set down her pen. I need to coach you on testimony, she said. Testifying against someone you have raised is a specific psychological experience, and preparation changes outcomes. She asked competency questions for 30 minutes. Date, current president, monthly income, financial management practices. Each question in the same neutral tone. Each answer expected to be complete and specific. She did not praise any answer. When I finished, she said clear, specific, no hesitation. Good. But the hard part is not the competency questions. The hard part, she said, is this Marcus's attorney is going to describe a man in cognitive decline. He does not know that the psychologist who created that profile is now testifying for us. He does not know about the financial documentation. He does not know about Kayla. When he presents his evidence, every cell in you will want to react. I know, I said, you cannot react. You sit quietly at our table and you let the evidence make the case. The facts will make the judge angry. You do not need to make her angry. You need to let her get there on her own. She looked at me steadily. I have watched respondents lose strong cases by standing up when they should have stayed seated. Can you stay seated? I spent 22 years following orders in situations where what I wanted to do was not what the mission required. I said. Patricia held my gaze for a moment. Good, she said. I asked her the question I had been holding since we sat down. Can we win? I said. She looked at the evidence file on her desk. Then at me. Mr. Decker, she said. I have been doing this for 22 years. I walked into this room expecting a difficult case requiring careful construction. What you have brought me is not that. What you have brought me is a complete legal record documenting premeditated financial elder abuse, the cooperation of the person who designed the fraud, the cooperation of the expert witness Marcus intended to use against you, and evidence that your late wife identified this threat before your son had fully committed to it. She picked up her pen. The question is not whether we can win, she said. The question is how long Marcus's attorney waits before advising him to plead. She set her pen down again. Her expression had shifted slightly toward something more personal than professional. I want to tell you one other thing, she said. I have lost 2 cases like this in the last 8 years. Both times the respondent had the truth on their side. Both times the documentation had gaps, and those gaps gave the petitioner's attorney enough room to construct an alternative story that was plausible enough for the judge. She looked at me directly. The documentation you have brought me leaves no room for alternative stories. I need you to understand that distinction clearly. Because in that courtroom on Friday, the proceeding will feel precarious regardless of how solid the evidence actually is. Do not let the feeling substitute for the reality. She had been in rooms where the right thing lost. She was telling me this room was different, and not to forget that when it would be easiest to forget. My phone vibrated on the table between us. I looked at the screen. Marcus. A text. See you Friday. Dad. Just wanted to hear your voice before the hearing. I know this process is a lot. I set the phone face down. Patricia saw, said nothing. Continued with her notes. We spent another hour mapping the sequence. Opening statements. My competency demonstration. Maggie's financial testimony. Kayla's documentation. Ferris. Diane's 3 videos, for which Patricia would request permission. The 4th video, the one labeled for Marcus only, would not be introduced. That one was not evidence. That one was something else. When we finished, I walked out into a March afternoon that felt different from the March afternoon 3 days ago. Not warmer, just more resolved. 3 days. I drove home without the radio. I did not sleep. I lay in bed until midnight, listening to the pines. And then I went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table with Diane's photograph in front of me. The hearing was 8 hours away. I had reviewed the evidence enough. Patricia had the sequence. The witnesses had their statements. There was nothing left to prepare. What remained was something preparation could not help with. I had spent 41 years being Marcus's father. That is not something you set aside when you walk into a courtroom, even when you are walking in to testify against him. You carry it with you whether you intend to or not. What I had to do tonight was not let go of it, but make room for it to coexist with what I was going to do in the morning. Because both of those things were true simultaneously, and only one of them was going to be allowed to direct my actions. I thought about a specific Tuesday afternoon when Marcus was 7 years old. He had knocked a glass of water off the kitchen counter while reaching for something, and it had shattered on the floor. He had stood looking at it with the expression children have when they are trying to decide whether to cry or run. And I had come into the kitchen and told him to stand still and not move until I had swept the glass. And he had stood perfectly still with his arms slightly out from his sides, the way I had asked him to stand. For the entire 3 minutes, it took me to sweep it up. Then I had handed him the dustpan to carry to the trash. He had carried it carefully with both hands, exactly as I had shown him. And then he had looked up at me and said, "I am sorry about the glass, Dad." I said, "I know you are." That was all. He had gone back to whatever he was doing. I had thought of that afternoon many times in the past month, without knowing why until tonight. He had been careful in the wrong direction his entire life. He had learned to be careful and to wait and to carry things properly and to look up and say the right thing at the right time. He had applied all of that to the project of taking everything from me. I did not know when that had started. I suspected it had started before I would have wanted to know. Diane had known. That was the part I had been living with since the videos. She had known, and she had watched me not knowing, and she had loved me too much to let me know before she was ready to give me the means to fight it. I had told her for 32 years that she saw people more clearly than I did. She had never disagreed, which at the time I had taken as modesty. Now I understood it differently. She had simply known it was true. I looked at her photograph. She was younger in this picture than she had been in her last years. The face from the years when she had been watching and building her understanding of the people around her, including our son, including me. At some point around 3 in the morning, a truck came up the forest road behind the cabin. The headlights swept through the kitchen window and lit the room for a few seconds. I watched them from my chair. The truck did not slow, did not turn into the drive. It passed and the kitchen went dark again, and the pines filled back in with whatever sounds they make at that hour. I had not moved from the chair. I noted that. It was a small test of the kind that arrives without announcement in the hours before something that matters. And passing it without moving told me something I needed to know about the morning. Outside the window, the Beartooth peaks were invisible. I had guided hundreds of men through that terrain in 30 years. I knew where the ridges ran and where the draws dropped. In the morning, I would be in a different kind of terrain, one I had spent 3 weeks learning, with guides I trusted. That was the thing I noticed when I sat with it, honestly, not afraid, tired, sad in a way that had stopped feeling like an emotion and started feeling like a fact about the world, but not afraid. The Army had taught me that the still place you find before an operation is not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. You do not become a different person. You become the same person operating from the steadiest available part of yourself. I had found that place at 23 in places whose names most people could not find on a map. I had found it again here, at a kitchen table in Montana at 4 in the morning, with a coffee cup and a photograph. At 5 o'clock, I went to the bedroom and put on my clothes. The suit I wore to Diane's funeral, I had worn it once since then. to a client's daughter's wedding last summer, which Diane would have said was exactly what you were supposed to do with a suit you had worn to a funeral. Use it for living. Do not let it become a thing you only take out for grief. I stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at the main room. The elk rack on the wall in the dark. The kitchen table where I had made every real decision of the last 30 years. The desk in the corner where Diane had kept things I had not known about and had given to me in the only way she could. I picked up my keys. I had no speech prepared. No final statement for the drive to Absaroki. No particular thought that seemed worthy of being the last one before it began. I had done what I could do. What came next was the doing of it. 5 o'clock in the morning, I was ready. The Stillwater County Courthouse in Absaroki had been built in 1923. The floors were original wood, worn smooth in the center of each plank, and they creaked in a sequence you learned after walking them enough times. The windows along the east side let in morning light that fell across the gallery benches in long, pale rectangles at this hour. I had arrived at 8:30, sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, which was not something I had planned, but which turned out to be necessary. There are things you know will happen and things you understand will happen. And occasionally, the gap between those two requires 10 minutes in a parking lot before you can walk through a door. Patricia was already inside when I entered. She had claimed our table and arranged her materials. She looked up when I came in, assessed me the way she had been assessing me since the first meeting, and said, "You look like someone who slept." "I did not sleep." I said, "Good," she said. "People who sleep the night before usually spend the morning in their heads." She turned back to her materials. Dale was in the gallery. He had come in early as well, taken the seat behind the respondent's table, and when I sat down, he put one hand briefly on my shoulder. That was all. 28 years of friendship expressed in 4 seconds of contact. At 8:47, I folded my hands flat on the table in front of me. Patricia leaned close. "He is going to walk in expecting an empty chair," she said quietly. "Give him a moment to see you. Do not turn toward him. Let him come to you." I understood. I was looking at the front of the courtroom. The judge's bench, empty. The court reporter's station, empty. The clock above the main door showing 8:53. The door opened at 9 o'clock. Brad Kellner came in first. He was 47, broad-shouldered, with the carriage of a man who had practiced looking confident in rooms like this. He was talking to Marcus, something low and professional about procedure, not yet looking at the respondent's table. Marcus was looking at the respondent's table. I did not turn toward him. I was watching it in my peripheral vision. Marcus had walked into a courtroom expecting an empty chair at the respondent's table. He had found a 67-year-old man in a dark suit, both hands flat on the table, back straight, eyes forward. Marcus went still for what I counted as 3 seconds. Brad Kellner did not notice. He was looking at his briefcase. Marcus recovered quickly, which told me something. He put the confidence back on his face, set his briefcase down, and looked at the clock. He passed our table on the way to his seat. He stopped. "Dad," he said, "you should be resting." "I am," I said, looking forward. "Right here." He held for a moment. Then he moved to his table and sat down. I heard the legs of his chair settle against the wooden floor with the particular sound of this room. Judge Carol Whitman entered at 9:05, and the room stood, and the bailiff announced the case. And we sat, and the hearing formally existed now. Whitman was 61, gray-haired, with the economy of motion of someone who had been making consequential decisions in formal rooms for a long time. She confirmed the recording was running, reviewed a document, and looked at the room. This is a guardianship petition filed under Montana Code 725311, she said. Petitioner will present first. Respondent will have full opportunity to respond. She looked at Brad Kellner. Counselor, you may proceed. Kellner stood. He was good. I say this because it was true, and because understanding the quality of what was working against you is not a weakness. He laid out a clean, organized argument, the concerns about his client's father, the evidence of cognitive difficulties observed over an extended period, the need to protect Roy Decker's assets from decisions that Roy Decker was no longer fully equipped to make. He spoke for 22 minutes without notes, which meant he had rehearsed this thoroughly, which meant Marcus had retained someone who took this case seriously. He talked about Dr. Ferris's assessments. He described them as thorough and professional. He did not know that Ferris was in a hotel 2 miles from this courthouse. He talked about Roy Decker's financial situation, accounts in disarray, tax complications, difficulty managing basic obligations. He did not know that Maggie Tran would be in this courtroom in 40 minutes with a forensic reconstruction of how those complications had been engineered. He talked about the difficulty of aging alone and the importance of family support structures. He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Kellner set his folder on the table, and for the first time since he had entered the room, he looked directly across at the respondent's table, at Patricia, at the accordion folder in front of her, which was considerably thicker than anything he had brought. His expression changed. The deliberate confidence did not leave entirely, but something shifted behind it. A small recalculation. Patricia stood. Your Honor, she said, I represent Roy Decker. Mr. Decker is going to demonstrate his complete legal competence this morning. Beginning with a direct examination I would like to conduct now, after which we will be introducing a substantial body of evidence that addresses not only the claims in the petition, but the circumstances under which this petition came to be filed. She looked at Kellner once, briefly. Mr. Decker, she said, please describe for the court your service history and current occupation. I leaned forward slightly, cleared my throat. I served as an Army Ranger for 22 years. I said, I have operated a licensed wilderness guiding business in Stillwater County for the past 30 years. I am 67 years old, and I am the respondent in this proceeding. The room was quiet. I had not looked at Marcus since the exchange at the table. I did not look at him now. But in the silence that followed those 3 sentences, I heard his chair settle, very slightly, against the old wooden floor. Patricia asked me 4 competency questions first, in front of the court, and I answered each one with the specific, complete answers she had drilled me on in her office. Full name, date and place of birth, monthly income from pension and guiding operations, approximate, the name of the bank where I held my primary accounts, and the approximate balance before the unauthorized withdrawals began. Judge Whitman listened and made notes. Then Patricia shifted. Your Honor, she said, I would like to introduce our financial expert. Maggie Tran, licensed forensic accountant, has prepared a complete analysis of Mr. Decker's accounts covering the last 20 years with particular focus on the past 18 months. Maggie took the stand. She had worn a dark jacket and had her notes in a folder she did not open because she did not need it. She testified the way she worked methodically, without wasted language. She walked the court through the financial timeline she had reconstructed. The college era pattern, 2002 through 2006, 50 transactions averaging $360, total $18,240. She explained the threshold calibration, each amount chosen to remain below the bank's automated alert floor, varied slightly each month to avoid establishing a pattern a human reviewer might notice. Judge Whitman interrupted. Varied deliberately. She said, "You are saying this was not random variation?" "No, Your Honor. This pattern is the work of someone who understood banking compliance thresholds and built the withdrawal structure around them." The court was quiet. Maggie moved to the recent period, the 8 months of larger withdrawals, February through September of the previous year. She described the routing structure Kayla had built, 3-layer account movement designed to create distance between source and destination. She described the calibration intervals. She described what someone with genuine expertise in institutional fraud detection had constructed in the service of taking money from a 67-year-old man's retirement account. Brad Kellner cross-examined for 12 minutes. He did not find a crack in the numbers, because there was no crack. The numbers were documented, verified, and presented in the format Maggie had used in 11 previous expert testimonies. Kellner sat down, without the confident energy he had carried into the morning session. Patricia handed the clerk our witness list. Standard procedure. The clerk passed it to Kellner, who glanced at it and then passed it to Marcus. I was not looking at Marcus. I was looking at the witness list in Kellner's hands. But in my peripheral vision, I saw Marcus take the paper and scan it. Then his pen stopped moving. He had been making notes on a legal pad throughout the morning, the habit of a man who needed to feel in control of what was being recorded. The pen stopped. He had seen Kayla Marsh's name. Kellner saw it too, a beat later, because he was reading his own copy. He leaned toward Marcus and said something low. Marcus responded without turning from the paper. Whatever he said. Kellner sat back. Your Honor, Patricia said, our next witness is Kayla Marsh. Ms. Marsh has direct and first-hand knowledge of the financial architecture introduced in Ms. Tran's testimony. Kayla had driven up from Las Vegas 2 days before. She came to the stand in a gray blouse and dark pants and sat with her hands folded on the railing in front of her. She looked at Patricia. She did not look at Marcus. Patricia walked her through it. Her name, her professional credentials, her relationship to Marcus, the nature of his initial request 14 months ago. Kayla answered each question in the same precise tone she had used on the phone with me, the tone of someone who had decided to be accurate and was committing to it regardless of the cost. She described designing the withdrawal threshold structure. She described the routing architecture for the larger transfers. She described specific emails from Marcus with specific instructions. She described the day she understood the arrangement was not temporary and asked him to explain it. She described his response. She described when Marcus stopped returning her calls. Patricia sat down. Kellner stood. He was not finished, and I gave him credit for that. He walked toward the witness stand with the expression of a man who had found the angle he needed. Ms. Marsh, he said. You are cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for consideration on your own charges. Is that correct? Yes, Kayla said. So you have a significant motivation to provide testimony that serves the prosecution's case, rather than testimony that accurately reflects events. Kayla met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, she said. And my motivation for telling the truth is that I do not want to spend the next decade in a federal prison for someone who stopped returning my calls the day before I planned to ask him to end this. The courtroom went very still. Kellner had no follow-up that was going to help him. He returned to his table. I had watched Marcus throughout Kayla's testimony, by the only means available to me from our angle, the reflection in the glass of the framed document hanging on the far courtroom wall. It was imperfect, but sufficient. Marcus had held his expression through Maggie's testimony, through the witness list, through the first part of Kayla's account. During Kellner's cross-examination, when Kayla said the line about not returning calls, Marcus looked down at the legal pad in front of him. His pen was still. Judge Whitman called a 15-minute recess. As the room began to move, Kellner leaned close to Marcus and spoke with urgency. Marcus shook his head. Kellner spoke again, more urgently. Marcus shook his head a second time. Kellner sat back and looked at his folder, and his expression told me he was a man who had just been refused the advice he knew was correct. I looked forward and waited. Whatever was coming next, we were ready for it. The afternoon session began at 1:30. The courthouse air had warmed with the morning, and the afternoon light through the east windows had shifted to the particular angle that makes old wooden floors look richer than they are. Judge Whitman returned to her bench with the same economy of motion she had arrived with that morning. The morning had apparently not surprised her. I did not think the afternoon would either. But I had learned by now that Carol Whitman was not a judge who allowed her face to make early commitments. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "we call Dr. Glenn Ferris." The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and Ferris walked in. I was watching Marcus when it happened. I had been watching Marcus in the frame glass reflection throughout the recess and the afternoon procedural, and I watched him now as Ferris entered. Marcus had maintained the controlled expression since the morning's opening. Through Maggie's testimony, through Kayla's. He had lost the easy confidence, but he had held the expression. He lost the expression when he saw Ferris. It was not the 3-second freeze from the morning. It was quieter than that, and worse. Something went out of Marcus's face that had been there through everything else. Some fundamental assumption about how this day was structured. He had known Kayla was going to testify. Whatever he had told himself about that. He had prepared for it. He had not prepared for this. Ferris walked to the stand with the unhurried movements I remembered from the cabin. He settled into the witness chair, placed his hands on the railing, and looked at Patricia. Patricia walked him through the engagement with Marcus, the commission, the 8 months of observation, the methodology and results. She asked him what he had found over those 8 months, and he said 0 evidence of cognitive decline. He was precise about what that meant: memory intact, reasoning sound, decision-making consistent with a younger and fully competent individual. He produced his notes from inside his jacket, the same multi-page document he had placed on my kitchen table 3 days before. Patricia introduced it as evidence. The document was 17 pages, dated, organized by observation period, signed. Kellner did not object, because there was nothing to object to yet. Then Patricia asked him what Marcus had asked him to do after receiving those findings. Ferris was steady. He described the escalating requests: look again, look differently, find something usable. He described the threat using Idaho. He described the final call after the bear attack, the request for backdated documentation, the specific clinical language Marcus had requested. He described it the way he had described it to me in the cabin, flatly, precisely, without performance. Kellner rose for cross-examination with a different quality than he had shown in the morning. The morning had been methodical confidence. This was something more compressed. He had one line of attack, and he had to make it land. "Dr. Ferris," he said, "you have a documented history of providing false psychological assessments in at least one prior professional engagement. Is that correct?" "Yes," Ferris said. In that case, you were paid to document characteristics in a client that did not exist. Correct. Correct. So this court is being asked to accept your testimony based on your professional credibility. When your professional credibility includes a case in which you invented clinical findings for personal financial gain, Ferris looked at Kellner directly. Yes, he said. And I would like to address that directly, if I may. Kellner had not expected the offer. He gestured for Ferris to continue. In that prior case, Ferris said, I provided documentation favorable to the person who was paying me. In this case, I am testifying in direct opposition to the person who retained me and in direct service of the respondent, against my own significant professional and financial interests. The situations are structurally opposite. The argument that my willingness to lie in the first case proves I am lying now requires me to be simultaneously motivated by money in both directions, which is not coherent. He looked at Kellner calmly. In the first case, I did wrong because it benefited me. In this case, I am doing the opposite of what would benefit me. I am able to tell the difference between those two things, even if I was not always willing to act on that difference. The courtroom was quiet. Kellner had nothing that would help him. The courtroom had understood what Ferris was saying. A man who had done wrong once was testifying in the way that cost him something, rather than the way that benefited him. That distinction was not difficult to read. Kellner returned to his table with the expression of a man who had known the cross-examination was not going to succeed and had run it anyway because his client required it. Marcus was looking at the table in front of him. His pen had not moved since Ferris began testifying. Patricia stood. Your Honor, she said. We have one final piece of evidence. It is a video recording made by Roy Decker's late wife, Diane Decker, approximately 4 months before her death. The recording was made by Mrs. Decker in her home without assistance and is addressed specifically to the petitioner, Marcus Decker. It has not been played publicly. It is relevant because it establishes what Mrs. Decker knew about her son's intentions, and when she knew it, predating the events at the center of this petition by several months. She paused. We are asking the court's permission to play it now. Judge Whitman looked at Kellner. Kellner looked at the table. Then he looked at Marcus. The look of an attorney checking for instructions. Marcus gave him nothing. No nod, no shake. Nothing. Whitman looked at Patricia. Play it, she said. I looked forward. In the corner of my vision, Marcus had not moved. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, which was the same position mine had been in all morning. I had adopted it deliberately. I wondered if he had too, and whether he had any idea what he was about to hear. The room waited. The video was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. Patricia told me this afterward. I did not watch the clock during those 3 minutes. I did not watch much of anything. What I did was look at my hands flat on the table and listen. 3 minutes and 40 seconds is a long time to hold still. I had done it in other conditions, in other rooms, for purposes that required it. What made this different was that the voice belonged to someone I had been listening to for 32 years, and the person she was speaking to was someone I had loved for 41. And both of them were on the other side of something I could not reach across. I held still. I breathed. I listened. The speaker in the corner of the courtroom was not designed for this. It was a small unit mounted near the witness stand, adequate for playing recorded phone messages and security footage. What it was not designed for was Diane Decker, who had spent 27 years learning how to make her voice carry into the far corners of a room so that every second grader at every desk could hear what she was saying. It carried. Marcus, she said. If you are watching this in a courtroom, then I have failed to find another way to reach you. I want you to know that I tried. I asked your father to talk to you. He told you that family does not do that to family, and you heard that as permission. That is not his fault. That is the distance I could not close in you. No matter what I tried. She paused. I am not going to tell you what you did wrong. The court has done that. I am going to tell you what I remember. The summer you were 9 years old, you found a bird with a broken wing in the backyard. You carried it inside in both hands and stood in the kitchen doorway and asked me what to do. We made a box lined with kitchen towels. We fed it for 3 weeks. You checked on it before school every morning. You cried the day it flew away. I have thought about that bird many times in these past months. I do not know what happened between the boy who carried that bird with both hands and the man who did what you have done. But I know that boy was real. I know because I raised him, and I know exactly what he felt like in the world. The court reporter had stopped typing. I noticed this the way you notice peripheral things when your attention is entirely focused on something else. I forgive you, Marcus. Not because what you did was something a person gets forgiven for, but because you are my son, and I have been forgiving you your whole life, and I am not going to stop now. I hope your father can find his way there eventually. I hope you give him a reason to try. That was all. The room held the quiet after the video ended. Not empty quiet. The kind that is full of something that has just been said and has not yet finished arriving. I kept looking at my hands. The court reporter was still not typing. Judge Whitman spoke. She denied the guardianship petition in its entirety. She referred the matter to the federal prosecutor's office for criminal investigation. She ordered Marcus held pending bail assessment, citing financial sophistication and severity of federal exposure as making flight risk a serious consideration. Then she looked at our table. Mr. Decker, you are fully competent to manage your own affairs and property. This court recognizes no legal basis for any restriction on your autonomy. This proceeding is closed. The gavel came down. I sat still. The bailiff approached Marcus's table. Marcus stood before the man reached him, which told me he had spent the morning understanding what was coming and had decided how to receive it. He put his hands together at the wrist. His attorney said something low. Marcus nodded once. In the same way you nod when you have heard something you already knew. I watched Marcus walk across the courtroom toward the door. At the threshold he stopped. The bailiff let him stop. Marcus turned. He looked across the empty space of the courtroom to where I was still sitting. Dad, one word. I had heard Marcus's voice in many registers across 41 years. The voice that had said the old man into a phone. The warm professional voice from the hospital. The voice that had offered me a patient advocate while I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. None of those voices were present now. What remained was something older. A frequency I recognized from before any of it had gone wrong. I looked at him. Diane had spoken. What she had said to our son was not something I was going to come after. The bailiff guided him through the door. The door closed. Quieter than I expected. Patricia sat down. She waited a moment before she spoke. Are you all right? She said. I looked at the closed door. At the empty table where Marcus had been sitting. At the room that had heard what it had heard and would now begin the process of returning to its ordinary dimensions. No, I said. Not yet. She nodded and did not push further, which was exactly right. Dale appeared at my shoulder, coming from the gallery where he had sat through the entire morning and afternoon without moving. He did not say anything either. He just stood there, which was the thing I needed. The three of us sat in the emptying courtroom, while the light through the east windows shifted toward late afternoon. After a while, I stood up. "We have work to do," I said. Patricia gathered her folder. Dale picked up his hat. We walked out into the May afternoon, into air that was cool and clear and entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside. That was all right. I had not needed the day to be anything other than what it was. 3 months after the civil verdict, I sat at the kitchen table on a Monday morning in late August and had nothing to do. This was unusual. For 14 months I had been fighting something. Before that I had been guiding, and before that I had been grieving, and before that Diane had been sick, and before that there had always been the next season, the next booking, the next thing the cabin or the land or the business required of a man who did not know how to be idle. I had spent 67 years filling time with purpose. The absence of purpose had its own particular weight. The federal trial was scheduled for October of the following year, 11 months away. Sandra Cho had built a careful case and said she needed the time to build it correctly. She had also opened a separate inquiry into the circumstances of the bear attack on Beartooth Pass. I had not asked what she expected to find. I looked at Diane's photograph. There is a thing that happens when a fight that has held you upright for a long time ends. Not relief, which is what people expect. What happens is that the structure stops being necessary, and you have to figure out who you are without it. I had asked this question before, coming home from the army after 22 years. The answer then had been the land, the work, and Diane. 2 of those 3 were still here. What do I do with all this now? I asked the photograph. The photograph looked back with the particular expression it always had, which was the expression she wore when she thought I already knew the answer and was just working up to it. I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes before I finished explaining it. The Diane Decker Veterans Protection Initiative. Free legal consultation, forensic financial review, and court representation for veterans over 60 facing family financial abuse. Patricia would serve as lead counsel pro bono for the first year and bring in 2 younger attorneys for casework. Seeded with the restitution payment from the civil verdict, money Marcus had taken and the court had ordered returned with interest. I want to use his money, I said. I want to turn what he took and make it into something. Patricia said, I know a community center in Absaroki that will give us the space. The launch event was on a Tuesday evening in early September. Dorothy Mills, who ran the center, had set up 40 folding chairs in a semicircle. The coffee maker at the back was one of those large commercial units that community centers everywhere seem to acquire without anyone remembering how. The fluorescent lights hummed. Dorothy had made a banner on her computer and taped it to the wall above the small podium, Diane Decker Veterans Protection Initiative. Free legal help for veterans and their families. 38 people came. Older faces mostly. People who had spent time outside. A few who had brought their parents. Some alone in the back rows with the posture of people not yet certain they belonged. My name is Roy Decker, I said. My son drugged me and stole from me and filed papers to have a court declare me legally incompetent. He would have succeeded if my wife had not spent her final months preparing evidence she hid in a locked drawer for me to find after she was gone. The room was quiet. I told them the rest in the form I had been working on in my head since the May morning I walked out of Whitman's courtroom. Not a victim's account and not a hero's account. Just the sequence of events described by someone who had been through them and understood what they meant. I talked about the specific mechanisms Marcus had used, the guardianship petition, the forged signatures, the calibrated withdrawal structure, the private psychologist. I named each piece because each piece was something another person in this room might recognize in their own situation. When I finished, I said Patricia Reeves is at that table. If anything I described tonight sounds familiar to you, please go talk to her. We will not charge you for the consultation. We will not judge what you tell us. We will help if we can. Then I stepped back from the podium. A man came forward after about 10 minutes. He was 72 years old, Korean War veteran, barrel-chested, with the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime not asking for help and was now asking because he had run out of other options. His name was Frank Coleman. His grandson had moved in with him 6 months ago after losing his job. The grandson had gradually taken over the bank accounts. Money had been moving. Sit down, Frank. I said. Tell me everything. I want to hear all of it. He sat down and talked for 45 minutes. At some point he said, he keeps telling me I'm getting confused. Says I've been forgetting things. 6 months of that now. Frank paused and looked at his hand on the table. And the thing is, Roy, I'm starting to believe him. I recognized that sentence. I had almost believed the same thing about myself. When he was finished, I walked him to Patricia's table, behind us. 3 more people were waiting in a loose line. I looked at the banner Dorothy had made, at the photograph of Diane on the registration table. She was smiling in it the way she smiled when she was watching something she had set in motion working the way she intended. Diane had not left evidence to save one man. She had left it to create a man who could save the people now standing behind Frank Coleman. That was what she had built. I was only the instrument she had chosen to build it with. I had just turned toward the 4th person in line when my phone rang. Dale, Roy, he said. I found something. The ring. Diane's engagement ring. I know where it is. I did not fly. The drive from Absaroki to Las Vegas is roughly 14 hours, which anyone with a schedule would call a poor use of time. I drove anyway, leaving before 5 in the morning and taking the interstate south through Utah because I needed the miles. After 4 months of court dates and depositions and attorneys and hearings, after 14 months before that of something I did not yet have a single word for, I needed 2 days of road and landscape, and nothing that required anything of me except driving. I told Dale where I was going. He did not say anything about the wisdom of it. He said, call me when you get there. The cabin, when I left it, looked the way it always looked in early morning, the elk rack on the west wall catching the first light through the windows, the kitchen table with the legal pad on it, Diane's photograph in its place. I stood in the doorway for a moment before I closed it. Then I got in the truck and drove south. Utah in December is its own kind of country. Red rock and pale sky and distances that make Montana look intimate. I drove through it for most of 2 days, and it did not ask anything of me, and I was grateful. The federal trial was 11 months away. The initiative had 9 cases in its first 3 months of operation. Frank Coleman's situation had been referred to Sandra Cho's office as a parallel matter. There was work waiting. There would always be work waiting. For 2 days, there was just the road. Dale had found it through a contact who ran a network of pawnshop registries in Nevada. The shop was on Fremont Street in a section of Las Vegas that was not the part anyone came to visit. Small storefront, a hand-lettered sign. The kind of window display that told you the proprietor had acquired many things from people in difficult circumstances and understood that each thing carried its own history. A glass case inside held jewelry, watches, cameras, and military medals that someone had needed money more than they had needed the acknowledgement. The man behind the counter was in his late 60s, Vietnamese, with the particular attention of someone who had been reading people across a counter for a very long time. I told him what I was looking for. Not the general category, the specific ring. Roy Decker of Absaroka, Montana. My son had brought it in sometime last fall. I gave him the description, the approximate date, the inscription on the inside band. He looked at me for a moment. Then he went to the back. He returned with a small box. I opened it. The ring was as I remembered it. A modest thing, a small stone in a simple setting, made by a jeweler on Main Street in Absaroka, who had been in that shop for 30 years before retiring. I had designed it in the sense that I had described to him what I wanted, and he had made it. D+R, May 2004. The month I had asked Diane in the yard of the cabin we had just finished building together, standing in the dirt between the foundation and the porch steps. Without a speech prepared, she had said yes before I finished the question. How much? I said. The man looked at the ring, then at me. He closed the box and slid it across the glass counter. No charge, he said. I looked at him. He had the expression of someone who had made a decision and was not inclined to revisit it. I thanked him and left. The drive back was longer because I was in no hurry. 2 nights in Utah motels with thin walls and truck-filled parking lots, and I slept better than I had slept in over a year. I think this was because I was in between things. Not where I had been. Not yet where I was going. The in-between turned out to be a kind of rest I had not been able to find any other way. I drove into Absaroka on a Thursday morning and went to the cemetery before I went home. Diane's grave was in the section nearest the cottonwood trees, which she would have chosen for exactly that reason. The stone was simple. Her name, her dates, and the words I had picked for her. She saw things others missed and told you about them. I knelt in the frost-stiff grass. I had not planned what to say. I had learned, with her, that the things that mattered did not require planning. I took out the ring and placed it against the base of the stone where the grass met the granite, in the spot that caught the most morning light. Diane, I said, we made it. Not the way we planned, but we made it. A hawk turned circles in the pale December sky above the cottonwoods, indifferent and precise. I watched it until it moved over the tree line. Then I stood up and left the ring where it was. That was where it belonged, on the stone, in the light, where anyone who came to see her could see it too. I drove home. The cabin was as I had left it. Elk rack, kitchen table, legal pad with 4 names on it. 4 people who had contacted the initiative while I was driving. Diane's photograph. I took off my coat and put on coffee and sat down. The first name on the list was a 71-year-old veteran in Billings. His daughter-in-law had been managing his accounts for 2 years. He had understood 6 months ago that something was wrong and had not known who to call. He knew now. I picked up the phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring. My name is Roy Decker. I said, I heard you needed someone to talk to. I have time.